No need for a long preamble on this one, let's just jump right into it. This is Pocket Now and I'm Joshua Vergara. What's going on, everybody? This is my review of the iPhone SE, the new iPhone SE, and this video is sponsored by Visible. You're going to want to stick around to see how you can get this phone for just $184. The iPhone SE looks and feels extremely familiar, and that's kind of the whole point. Taking from the design language of the iPhone 8, this phone feels like the upgrade users before the iPhone 10 were waiting for but they never got. Once you get past the surface though, you'll see that a lot has changed. There's no Plus or Max or bigger version, just this one small size that translates to really easy handling but a smaller overall smartphone experience. Despite the shrunken down screen and the smaller footprint, the internal specifications far exceed what the pre-10 iPhones were capable of. So in a sense it is a return, but it's more like a Franken iPhone brought back to life. Which does beg the question of many users who are looking at the iPhone SE as their next device. Does a design like this actually fit in the current landscape of full screen displays and multiple cameras? If you're already deep into the Apple ecosystem, does it even make sense to go to the iPhone SE if you already have one of the current gen iPhones? And while all of these questions are valid, the most franken part of this review is the consideration of these details, with one important detail that looms overhead: $399. So let's see what $399 does get you from Apple's perspective. So let's start with the size of the phone, which is almost surprisingly diminutive. This is a design language that has been made rare and near obsolete over the years by current high-profile smartphones. There are big bezels on the top and bottom that flank the 4.7-inch 720p Retina LCD panel, making enough room for another returning feature in Touch ID. The outer portions of the phone are straight out of the iPhone 8 playbook, with rounded corners and smooth edges accompanying the typical button layout and of course the silence toggle. The screen on the iPhone SE is small, there's just no way around it. Well, technically there is a way around it because there's so much room on the sides. You know what I mean. Watching media for long periods of time on this device brings us back to a time when big screens were not the norm they are now. My eyes got a little tired, and the phone is admittedly usually a bit too close to my face for comfort. But if this phone is all about doing the best with what it's got, then the 4.7-inch display is actually one of the best of its size I've ever laid eyes on. It's sharp, vibrant, and there will always be bonus points for handling, though that has as much to do with the extras above and below as it does with the size. I already mentioned Touch ID, and it's nice to see it make a comeback, but it would have been great to have the old with the new, having Touch ID with Apple's more recent Face ID tech alongside it, but clearly having both would have made this device blow past its intended price point. But in some ways, the Touch ID home button fits better into our current lives. More and more places around the world are requiring face masks when out in public, and it might end up being our new norm. I already experienced the benefit of a fast and tactile fingerprint reader when out and about with my own mask on. Face ID just won't unlock when half of my face is covered up. So in one way, that's an endorsement for the accuracy that Face ID requires. But then again, that's also a bit of a wake-up call to Apple and honestly plenty of other companies that have done away with fingerprint biometrics altogether. Surprise, surprise, it's kind of useful to have both. And honestly, a home button might be better for some of our less tech-savvy general users. Steep learning curve or not, everyone just had to adjust to those full-screen gestures at one point or another. Having a strong haptic feedback button down there is a refreshing flashback that I did have to readjust to, but in having a tactile navigation method, Apple's basically throwing a bone to people who find the requirements of weirdly specific swiping uncomfortable. One thing I was really surprised by is the audio quality coming from these two speakers. There's one down here and then there's one inside of the phone speaker you would normally use for calls, but it emits sound also, meaning you have a dual stereo speaker setup, and it actually sounds pretty great. Speaking of calls, the quality is fine in both directions, whether I'm actually in a video call on FaceTime or Google Duo, or I'm doing real phone calls. Which is great because it was on the iPhone SE that I had my first experience on Visible. Visible is America's first digital-only wireless carrier that focuses on simplifying your experience. When you sign up, your first month is $25 for unlimited everything, and then every other month is $40. Yep, that's data, messages, minutes, hotspot, all unlimited and all on Verizon's 4G LTE network. You want to save more? You can try Party Pay, where you have multiple lines, and if you have 2 lines, it'll be $35 each. If you have 3, it'll be $30 each, and for 4, it's $25 each. It sounds too good to be true, but trying it is so simple that it's actually risk-free, and maybe one of the best parts is that you don't have to waste time in a store, because there aren't any stores, and there are no contracts, so there's no gray areas. Simply follow the link in the description below to join, and notice that Visible has the iPhone SE at just $184 thanks to a $200 MasterCard promo. There is no better deal to grab an iPhone SE today. Thank you to Visible for sponsoring this video. So in some ways, the iPhone SE finds itself between two different eras of iPhone's pedigree. Now you have some trade-offs because of the design language coming from the iPhone 7 and 8, but then you get some really tangible advantages due to 2020 specifications that are basically required in many flagships. So if you told me a couple of years ago that I could get an updated version of an iPhone 8, I would have thought you were from the future. Well, guess what? The future is now. Fast 18-watt charging gets the battery back to full in no time, even if the battery is quite small, and I was only able to get about 6 hours of screen on time under heavy, mainly camera usage. That type of longevity, or the lack of it, is easy to look past given the price point, but it's not totally forgivable. I guess the best way to put it is users of the iPhone SE will still say all of those classic lines. Do you have a cord? Anyone have a charger? Can I use your charger? Wireless charging is another convenience the iPhone SE potentially introduces to users who haven't kept up with the flagship trends. Seriously, if you're not really into wireless charging, it is a very convenient thing to have, especially in this work-from-home lifestyle most of us have right now. And of course, the Bionic A13 ensures that the iPhone SE is one of the smoothest smartphone experiences at its price point, making the case to every other manufacturer that compromises in core performance are simply foolish. Now, yes, there is some evidence to suggest that the A13 in this phone is underpowered, but that kind of makes sense to me. I thought about this in terms of like gaming laptops. So imagine a gaming laptop like this, which is like $1,300, $1,400 or less, and compare that to other gaming laptops that are easily $1,700, $1,800 or more. Now, they have the same generation processor, but of course there's a difference in performance. And what is that difference? The power output of that CPU. Other features get chopped up or omitted altogether to match what the CPU is in those different laptops, but at the end of the day, you're still pretty much able to enjoy your favorite games. And isn't that ultimately what matters? The general experience for general users is just as good as you would expect from a current-gen iPhone, and in a weird way, that's exactly what the iPhone SE is. It's still a current-gen Apple device, it's simply scaled down to meet a specific price. The Bionic A13 also helps elevate a camera experience that still has one foot in the past. This is basically the same hardware as the iPhone 8, a single shooter on the rear, 12 megapixels with f1.8 aperture. It has a fast focusing system, which is good for video, of which the iPhone SE can record at 4K at 60 frames. This is a tangible benefit of an updated processor. Portrait mode with all of its different filters and quirks can be used on either camera, and Smart HDR does its job in stills, even though in a cursory test with the iPhone 11 Pro, I found that the Pro yielded more aggressive Smart HDR results in video. The main omission is the lack of a night mode, which means that night shooting won't be quite as accessible as it is on the iPhone 11s. Another omission would be the lack of high-resolution recording on the front-facing camera, as well as the ability to do slow-fees, which were all the rage in Apple's marketing for the iPhone 11 line. You're ultimately getting a camera here that provides just what you need and really nothing more. You get good quality photos as long as there's enough light, selfies are solid with of course those portrait modes, and video is a definite overachieving highlight. So from my personal standpoint, the iPhone SE is not for serious smartphone creators that need extra lenses, extra focal lengths, or even extra hardware, but this camera is a great entry point for creative endeavors. And the quality that you can get from this shooter invites you to go further than the entry point starts you at. So you see, this is really a Franken iPhone, taking an old nostalgic design and injecting it with some but not all the trappings of today's best iOS experiences. But keep that one key portion of the phone in mind, iOS. This is Apple's ecosystem after all, and as I mentioned before, the familiar daily experience of getting in and out of apps, doing work, playing a little, and snapping some occasional memories is completely intact. What Apple has proven here is that they can set the bar pretty low for becoming part of their walled garden. Now, the original iPhone SE did introduce the idea of a cheap iPhone, but to call this new iPhone SE cheap is actually underplaying all the stuff you can get for $399. But to be fair, $399 actually gets you quite a lot in plenty of other markets outside of the US, because there are already competitors really hitting that mid-range to budget level price point with great experiences to boot. And that's something that might actually start happening here in the US thanks to releases like this one. Competitors from all angles have undercut even the iPhone SE's $399 asking price, and while I don't think the iPhone SE necessarily changes the game or does anything truly groundbreaking, it definitely puts the rest of the competition on notice. Everyone has stepped up their game in the flagship space recently, partially because of Apple. So let's see what happens in the mid-range segment, and if things start to ramp up there, I think at the end of the day we could all end up benefiting. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this review of the iPhone SE. This is a very exciting device, not just for the nostalgia factor, but also because here in the US in particular, it might actually signal a shift from many manufacturers towards the middle, towards the mid-range but still very reliable and affordable smartphone. Drop some likes on this video, get into the comment sections, and let us know what you think about the iPhone SE, and if you got one, let us know what your experience has been like as well. From there, you can subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. One more reminder to all of you to check out the description for the link towards Visible, which you can try out for yourself and potentially get this phone for $184. With all of that said, we're going to go ahead and call it on this one. Thank you so much for watching once again, and we will see you in our next video.